Hey YouTube, welcome back. And today we're going to be covering some more CSS topics. So this one specifically is CSS Selectors. So if you've ever wondered how to space the different class names, elements, divs, whatever, to be able to select and style your web pages, well, this is the tutorial for you. So I'm going to show you all the different ways you can select elements and style them. That way you can utilize that and make all your web pages styled however you would want them to be. Let's jump into it and I'll show you everything about CSS selectors. Alright, so in here we have, again, like our pretty normal setup where we have an index HTML, we have some of our stuff that is the index HTML on the right hand side. I just opened this file up in a web browser and you can see it. Let's make this a little bit bigger so that you can see exactly what's going on. And we have our style sheet, which is mostly commented out right now. We'll be going through this from the top to the bottom. And then this is just some different divs, some spans, some basic HTML elements. We have an input with a label. And so what that looks like here is a bunch of spans and some divs and like some text so we can see how different colors or selectors are applied so that we can see how to apply different combinations using basic selectors, grouping selectors, combinators, and then also some pseudo elements. So we'll cover all that and let's jump into it here. So again, this is our HTML, nothing crazy, just some basic stuff. And we'll minimize this a little bit because we're really going to be dealing with our CSS on the left hand side. We don't have any styles here. If I refresh the page, we don't have any background colors. We're mainly going to be using background color to see whenever something is styled. This is pretty usual whenever you're trying to figure out how something is selected. So the first one is a universal selector. So this is whenever you just want to style everything the same, no matter what element it is, no matter what class or ID or any, different category it is. You want to style it all the same. So this is usually used for CSS resets in things like Bootstrap, maybe even Tailwind, CSS, any CSS library that wants to take over and make sure that they don't have to deal with all the different variations between browsers. You'll do a CSS reset, have something like this style where it just blows away all the defaults and then resets from the ground up. So if we do this, we're going to set a background color of like this chartreusey looking color. And you can see everything in this page is now that color. No matter what we add here, if we added another div that was like, hello, well, guess what? You get to be that color too. All right, so let's move on to something more interesting because a lot of times you don't want to just style everything the same, which would be this star or universal selector. You want to make it a little bit more customized than that. So this is where basic selectors come in. And there's a few of them. There's ways you can do it by element, which is like your div, span, input, label. You can do it by class, you can do it by ID, and then you can do it by attributes. So let's start with element. And if we bring in both of these, so we're going to style our div and we're going to give it a height and a width, and then we're going to color it with this color. And then we're just going to apply the same thing to our input, give it the same color. So we have an input over here, and then we have a few divs. So if we refresh this, we can see we get that height and width, and then we also get the color for the backgrounds. You can see that there are some containing elements in here, like some p tags, but they also, because they're within the div element, they get styled the same way. Let's say we had a text area maybe, and this had some text in it. If we did this, then you can see it doesn't have our style in there. If we wanted to have that be styled, then we could say text area and include that element, and then it would have that same color for us. So that is how you use the elements. So we'll get rid of that for right now because the formatting is a little crazy, but that is how you would style by element. You have a bunch of options, div, label, input, as a bunch of different examples, and then you apply that CSS to it. So let's bring this back, and if we have a class, so we have these container classes on this first element, and not on the other ones. So if we bring this in, we'll have kind of a red color, and we should see this on the first element. So we see that because this is styling by CSS class, which you signify by saying this class attribute on whatever element you have. You know, our input doesn't have a class, but it has an ID. And then these other divs have classes of something that is not matching of container. So that is how you would do by class. And then if we wanted to style by ID, so like I mentioned, our input here has a ID of name. And so we should see the input change to be this goldenrod color. And we see that right there. So if we change this to something else, we would see it change. And we're selecting again by ID, which is this little thing right here. We could put this on others. So if we did ID name, then we would see that show up on all the other elements that have that attribute. Okay, moving on. So now we have an attribute, which is the last type. And so if we refresh this, we should also see it styled on the input, because that's our required attribute. And this is defined by having square brackets around it. So this orange color, maybe we change this to red so we can see it change. There we go. And whenever it has this attribute, any of these things that have a required attribute would then become red. So you can apply that and change it however you wish, and that's how you select those. So now, moving on to grouping selectors. So if we have, you know, our name, which is our input, and then all the p tags. So if we wanted to change the color of all of those, this would select all the matching nodes. It is comma separated, and so we have our ID, and then we have our element selector, and all of those should now become this coral color, and anything that matches that will change. So another option we have is doing, if we wanted to do like classes, so you can have a space in here, and it's going to select all the elements with both the container and the check class. And so this is going to be this container right here, and it shouldn't select this one because it doesn't have both of the classes. So if we refresh this, we'll see that only that element that has both of the classes is selected. If we got rid of this requirement, then both of these should be selected, and it is. Awesome. So that's how you select something where you want to have multiple CSS classes defined on it. You could also do multiple ID. Well, you couldn't do multiple IDs. This is usually for CSS classes. And then the last way you can kind of do these grouping selectors is doing descendants. And so you can see up here we have a space between our two CSS classes. Well, this one does not have a space. And so this is going to select the descendant of, like, whenever it's container, and then the descendant has the class container. So this is going to select, again, both of these two things because it selects all the elements that have that element within them. All right, moving on. If we bring this back to where it was, we can now talk about combinators. And so this is where things get a little bit more interesting, and you can have advanced selectors. All right, so if we wanted to apply these different styles to multiple containers and wanted to say, like, for every, you know, p tag that is inside of one of these CSS classes, then we could do that using this combinator. And so what this is going to do is apply this background color to all the p tags that are within the last container or the another container class. So these are our outer divs, and then the p tags are inside of there. So it should apply for these ones on the right hand side and nothing in the top one. So that is what we should see here. And we see that. So you can see all of those get applied because they're selected there. And they're just comma separated. So like I broke them onto multiple lines, which is what you would normally see, but you can split them that way and have them select. Now, if we wanted to make that a little nicer, there's some newer selectors that you can use. So you can use this is selector, and you can group all of the different outer CSS classes and then put them into a nice list. And then you don't have to repeat yourself the same way a couple of times. It saves you a little bit of typing, but nothing crazy. So this will do the same thing. If we refresh it, get the same exact result. Look at this where it's like the colon is, and then you can do a comma separated list of different elements or CSS IDs or classes. So the next one in Combinators after descendants is our child. And so this is going to select nodes that are direct children of the first element. If we have, our CSS class here, which is another container, it's going to select the p tag, which is the first element underneath that. This one should be right here in our middle and select this first one. So it selects these two, which are right here. So if we had another nested thing, like we had a div here and we had a p tag, nested p tag, then it should not select this one here. And you see that happen. Now, if this was moved out and was not nested, then it would be selected. So that's, again, how you're getting this little arrow here, making sure that it's only the first level underneath that parent element. All right. And so we can just leave that there. That's not doing us any harm. Fine. Could stop making breakpoints. There we go. All right. Let's comment that out, get us back to a clear state. And the next one we have after descendants and child is general sibling. And so this is a little tilde mark. It's in the top left-hand side of your keyboard. So it selects siblings, and it's the second element that follows the first. We have a couple of spans in here underneath our first container element. And if we refresh this, then we get the second one, the adjacent one that is selected. If we move this, then it still applies the same CSS. And so we see that, it gets selected even though it's not right next to it. But if it was nested, like our other example, so if we had a div and we had this, then this should not be selected anymore because it's not adjacent. It's not at the same level as the other span tag. So we'll back that out. Put it back. We have our nice selector, and then we'll put this guy back to where he was. Cool. And so that is the general sibling selector. It selects stuff right next to it or at the same level instead of doing the nested piece. So let's keep going. Now the adjacent sibling matches the second element only if it immediately follows the first. And so in this one, it needs to be right next to it, which again, if we have these divs, this first one's not selected, but the second adjacent one is selected. And then because this one follows another one, it is also selected. If we had a span right here in between the first and the second, then the second one would no longer be selected and only the third one would be selected. And so we can see that happen here because we broke up the format where the two divs are right next to each other. And this is defined by a plus sign. If we did, our tilde here, then this would stay and we would see both of these selected still. But because we're specifying it has to be right next to it and it's adjacent to it, then it no longer gets selected. There is one more combinator, but it's not actually supported by any browsers yet. It's called the column. It's used mostly in tables and like columns. So I haven't actually seen a whole lot of uses for it, but it's on a trial basis. So you don't need to know right now, just know it's out there and it's available probably at some point, but not supported quite yet. So now let's go back to our steady state and let's talk about pseudo classes and elements. And so these are a special state when an element has, like focus or hover, or like a URL link or like a hyperlink has been visited. Also, you have these really cool things where you can do selecting the first letter. So let's say we wanted to select the first letter of all our p tags here. If we refresh this, we can see that they all get selected. So if you wanted to do, some kind of special styling, maybe for, you have like a really long blog article or something and want to do something special where maybe the font, the font size or something you want really big. Well, you can accomplish that by doing this selector where you make all of them really, really giant. This is an option. Note that it has 2 colons. Almost all of these pseudo classes and elements have 1 colon, but there's a couple, and I'll bring this up at the very end. I'll show you this link and show you all the different variations because there is a ton in here. So there's a couple that have 2 colons that you'll have to just remember or reference, but most of them have 1. And so this one is first letter, it has 2. And then if we went to wanting to select like, different variations, like we wanted to add more space whenever it was like the second paragraph in a really long article. Well, we could do that by saying int child. And so this is gonna select the second, starting from the top, going down, the second p tag. And so it's gonna select that, and you can see for us, so that does I am a p tag, so right here, and this one is selected because it's the second one. Then again, this one, and then this is the last p tag, that one gets selected as well, because these are both the second child of that parent element. So if we bring this over, we can also do the last child. So this is going to select the same elements because it's starting from the bottom, and this is going to say I want the very last child where it's a p tag and it's nested within an element. And so if we refresh this, we can see that. I'm actually curious, let's try one where we have a p tag at the top level. I'm not sure what's gonna, okay. So this one also gets selected because it's nested, because it's the last child. If we had a couple of them, only the last one gets selected. You can see that happening here. There we go. So let's say we wanted to add something special. There's a lot of special characters and things that you can add before or after elements. And to accomplish that, you can use this after, which again has 2 colons. So let's say we wanted to have, a special image that was after all of our hyperlinks, or something after, in our case, our p tags. We want to have a super awesome image of a dog. Well, the way we can accomplish that is defining this. We define content with the URL, and if we refresh it, we get this really awesome dog picture on the beach. We get it after all of our p tags. So everybody gets to enjoy the beach with the dog, and it's all after each of these p tags. And you can see, up here where we don't have any p tags, we don't add the dog image. And so that's, how you can control stuff like that, where you're adding special characters, images, things in and after different CSS elements. A lot of frameworks like Material UI and things like that will make heavy use of this. So that's how you can do it yourself. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is all the different variations. And this, so we'll make this a little bigger. And this is all the variations that we have that we've covered. And so I'll link this in the description because it's quite a bit to try and memorize. You should just bookmark it and reference it. You can see in some of those pseudo selectors. So we went over after, there's also a before tag. For like a checkbox, you can do like a checked pseudo element. And so there's a bunch in the pseudo elements that you can play around with, and the inverse, like a not selector and things like that. So check these out, kind of brush up on them and check them out so you know that they're there. But by no means am I saying you should memorize this, just know where you can take a look at it. And really the meat of this is understanding this top section where you have, the different variations of selectors by basic selector, grouping, and Combinator, those are where you really should have a general understanding of how to select elements and where descendants and adjacent siblings and siblings are. Look at that and then use this reference to then figure out where those gaps are and like what you can learn afterwards. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe. If you want to see more CSS topics or anything else really, let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.